As what seem to be local problems, homelessness and housing affordability, seem to be local, and the solutions that you might think are your local government, increasingly, the more local government gets involved, the worse the problem gets. And why is that? Well, it might be that they're the ones that caused the problems in the first place. Let's take a deeper dive in that. I'm Bill Gross. This is my weekly real estate update. Now, before we get into the news, let's take a look at where the numbers are so we know where the market is today and have an accurate reading on where we are market-wise. In any economy, there's two factors that determine the effect of the market, if it's getting better or worse or up or down in terms of prices or value. There's demand and supply. Demand is most commonly measured by interest rates in buyers, lower rates, more buyers, higher rates, less buyers. And let's take a look at interest rates. This week, they closed basically flat, 7.15%. They've been in the range of 7% all year long. So the rates have come down. There's a lot of drama, a lot of stories about the Fed, about Janet Yellen, about this person, that person. At the end of the day, rates have been pretty steady. You look at that graph almost all year long, going back for about a year now, and doesn't seem to be really a major factor in changing the market. Also true, not having a major effect on changing the market, at least at this point in time, is inventory. Inventory continues to be at record low levels for non-pandemic years, slightly above last year. The only other years that were slower were pandemic years, and well below pre-pandemic years. So it would appear to me that we're kind of in the first full post-pandemic year, last year being kind of a hybrid, and so we'll see how it works out. But at the end of the day, we have just about 540,000 homes on the market, a little more than last year by 10%, but a lot less than years past, about 60% of the number of years past. So by any historical standard, we have very low inventory, and as long as that's the case, you cannot have prices dropping overall. That's a national market scene. Here in Los Angeles, the market has softened a little bit recently. One of the sources I use is Altos Research. They do a great job, and they take all the different factors of the market and have a number, and they call it they come up with a number 41, which for them is a seller's market, a little less so than last month's 42 or last week's 42. So we've been in the range of 43, 40, 41, 42 for quite a while. And I do see a little bit of lessening of the intensity of the seller's market, though still all my listings have offers. All of them are in escrow. All of them get backup offers. So we still have a fairly limited supply, and still fairly much in most price ranges, sellers are still in control of the market as a general rule. Let's take a look at the news. Now, one of my theses is the real estate news is in bed with the big advertisers and do a terrible job of educating the public. One of the worst jobs this week is Yahoo Finance, who chooses to amplify Bloomberg's article. And the title they put on it, though, is Home Buyers Are Starting to Revolt over steep prices across the U.S. They're revolting. I mean, you've seen, protests. You see people burning down houses. You see people blocking bridges about home prices. No, you don't see that. Actually, if only people would revolt over housing prices, maybe the government would stop spending money worse than drunken sailors. Hat tip in respect to drunken sailors. The politicians are worse. Because really, we should be upset. Basically, the government is stealing money from us. Every year, inflation robs us of economic value. And we're not really complaining. We're not in revolt over housing prices. We should be. I think it would be a good thing if people were revolt. I think if they revolted, they might change their politicians and change their government. But they're clearly not. And again, that's just hyperbole that I think sells. Also, speaking of selling into a bad market, here's an example of how bad things are in the squatters market. Now, they call it squatters. I just call it stealing people's homes. Homeowners get $10,000 insurance. Now, they don't get $10,000. They get $10,000 to fight squatters under a new policy. It sounds like they're going to get $10,000 under government policy, Newsweek writes. But in reality, you have the opportunity to buy a $10,000 policy that'll protect you from people stealing your equity in your house. And you read a little further, again, that headline is just completely misleading. As though you're going to get the money. You don't get a penny. You get the right to buy a policy for $100 a year that would protect you in case somebody moves in illegally and steals your equity. And of course, that's only if the insurance company acknowledges your claim and pays it. That's always a problem with insurance. But the thing that I think to point out here is not only is the news horrible in terms of the way they present it, but that the squatting or stealing of people's homes is so bad that the insurance industry is actually creating a new product to deal with it. And the fact that it's being taken seriously just shows you that they not only expect it to be bad, but to continue to be bad into the foreseeable future, because otherwise, why would you launch a new product? It takes years for acceptance. So this is an insurance company saying for the next 5 or 10 years, there'll be demand for this product. Very, very sad situation. Speaking of bad situations, Airbnb now is one of the methods used by drug dealers. We found out recently in Alhambra, California, a huge seizure, 200 pounds of meth. Sounds like a lot to me. I've never used it. Looks like a lot to me. Looks like a lot of people's death and destruction there in plastic bags. And so what the drug dealers did was they rented a house for distribution through Airbnb. So rather than paying a month's rent and getting a lease and all the paperwork, they just went to Airbnb and got a house and set up shop and started dealing drugs and got caught. And the thing that's even worse about this, for those of you who are in Airbnb using it, not the tenants of Airbnb, but the homeowners, is that once you have meth in a house, it gets much harder to sell. You have to disclose it. And if there was meth made in the house, that gets very difficult. You have to have some hazmat type testing done to verify that it's safe for people to live there. And so really, to save a couple $100 or to earn a couple $100 rental for a couple nights from a drug dealer could set you back half of the equity in your house or more. So be very careful if you're an Airbnb user. Obviously, there should be a checkbox. You don't want meth distributors using your property, but more than that, I think is a matter of that you want to make sure that you're not that you're being careful with who you're leasing your house out to and what services you're using. Also, in bad news, I think under bad provided news, Housing Wire, which really kind of caters, I think, to the big corporate interests in real estate, obviously disappointed unexpected trends in real estate agent dynamics. They were excited that they commissioned lawsuit, which I think is a fraud and disruptive to our economy, and I think it's an example of increased government control of our real estate industry, and I've done previous videos on that. And Housing Wire has been one of those really predicting the destruction of the real estate industry and almost gleefully predicting a 30% drop in the number of realtors. And when you hear realtors, think of self-employed business people who support their local customers and pay taxes, unlike Zillow and Redfin. And so here, Housing Wire is surprised to find out that in April, there's been an uptick in the number of real estate agents. Not a continued downtick. They were hoping it would go down post-COVID. It had gone down quite a bit, obviously like a lot of businesses. But it's turned around and gone up. And they're really disappointed by that. And I think that's because they'd like to see the whole world controlled by a few major corporations. And there are still Americans who are out there to start a business, get a license, and hit the ground. And I started my career years ago. I admire those people who are starting and trying to carve out for themselves a piece of the American dream. And so Housing Wire, unfortunately, is apparently disappointed. But I think overall that's good news. Speaking of Housing Wire, one of their other favorite topics is Zillow and Redfin, who obviously advertise on their website and subscribe to their service and come to their conferences. And so here I was surprised that they actually mentioned there's a competitor to Zillow called Relock. And obviously Zillow is a monopoly. I mean, if you went to high school like I did and learned about monopolies, it looks like Zillow, a company that just basically controls the market, destroys competition, along the way doesn't pay its fair share of taxes, putting out of business small companies that pay local, state, and federal taxes. And so here's a competitor, and I'm surprised to see it being advertised on the Housing Wire. So I'm sure that must mean Housing Wire. If you want to know how to read the news, it means the Housing Wire is either selling subscriptions to Relock or getting paid consulting fees, or Relock will have attendees paying to go to their conferences to market through them, because that's how news is these days. It's really all about paying to play. And so here's an organization now that's available in Florida, Georgia, and North Carolina, which means still no real Zillow competitor in most major states across the country. So normally we would call a monopoly a bad thing, but again, in the real estate news industry, those monopolies are called customers, and that's why they treat them so well. I also, under bad news reporting this week, CoStar, which you pay a lot of money as a subscriber, kind of soft pedals an interesting article about Los Angeles and the Playa Vista Silicon Beach area. Chicago investment firm offloads Los Angeles buildings in a sign of increased liquidity. Oh, isn't that great? There's increased liquidity. Well, that sounds good. How could that be bad? Well, you're reading to find out that these buildings right off of Jefferson Boulevard, beautiful area of Playa Vista, if you haven't been down there, Well, these buildings sold for $75 million. They had previously been bought for $150 million. So you have this wealthy Chicago investment company writing off 50% losses on their investment. They have liquidity, meaning instead of the buildings, now they don't have the debts and they don't have the risk of the property being lost. But I don't think the headline says, hey, the real estate office market dropped 50% here in Playa Vista, because that would send perhaps not only tremors through the whole market of office property, but perhaps even residential. People might want to wonder, why is it big companies are willing to lose $75 million on a $150 million investment? And what does that mean, if anything, to my house? Is there a problem there? Speaking, you always see in residential real estate, the advertisers always pining for more inventory. Inventory is not good when it's commercial or investors owning property. Here's an example. You see Rubio's Fresh Mexican Grill just created 48 new pieces of inventory by shutting down 48 stores statewide. And this is a result of Gavin Newsom's plan. He was going to make everybody wealthy by raising minimum wage. If we just make the minimum wage $1 million, everybody's a millionaire. The problem is companies can't afford to pay the minimum wage that he set. And as a result, some companies are automating jobs away, like McDonald's and Jack in the Box are. Others are just shutting down. Rubio's Fresh Mexican Grill closing 48 sites throughout the state. And so now we have more inventory available, I guess. I don't know if we could turn that into housing, but certainly we have less and less businesses, means less and less jobs, less and less money for people to pay taxes. So other than importing more illegal aliens and giving them tax dollars, I'm not sure what the plan is in California for us to continue to support and grow as an economy. Now, I started off with this video talking about how government's the problem, not the solution. One thing is, government is always touting themselves as the solution to problems they cause. The fact that housing is expensive is a result of inflation caused by the government. The fact that we have less housing is because of regulations caused by the government. And then they come in as white knights claiming to solve the problem that never gets solved. Here's an example. Recently, you have the largest U.S. veteran housing project, and it breaks ground in West LA. It's near the VA Center now in Westwood at the 405 freeway and Wilshire Boulevard. It sounds great. 1,200 units for veterans. I'm all for veterans. $1 billion. You'll notice it's going to be completed in the year 2030. Now, just a reminder, we're 2024, it's 6 years away. So at 6 years, Elon Musk built the state-of-the-art Giga Texas factory to have robots stamping out Cybertrucks in a year from the day he announced it to 1 year the first trucks or his first cars came off of the production line. He built rocket ships in less time. Here we have 6 years to build housing on a site that the government's had all this time. They're not buying the lots from anybody. They own all the property. What takes them 6 years? Well, the answer is politicians always give themselves timelines that can't be held accountable. Every politician who's at the groundbreaking ceremony, the congressman, they'll run for re-election and moved on to another job. The local city council member will have moved on to county positions, and the mayor will be on to her next job, governor or senator, wherever she's going to go. So one thing about government is they're never accountable for the results. They spend a lot more time talking about what they're going to do, and they rarely talk about what they've actually done, and for good reason, because generally what have they done in Los Angeles? Well, they've basically created very expensive housing and very difficult situations for people to live in. How can you say that, Bill? Well, here's an example. Here we have in Los Angeles the anti-camping bill, which was designed to remove those campers. I'm trying to find the right video spot. I'm sorry. I don't want that. Here we had an audit of the LA anti-camping law. And so we spent $3 million, and the statistics of the audit were amazing. They addressed 1,800 homeless people. 313 were put into temporary housing, and of those, 2 went into permanent housing. You won't know how long they stayed there. They could have been there for a year or 2 at most and moved on. It's just the housing they're in was permanent, not that they stayed there permanently. So we had 1,800 people confronted, and only 2 ended up permanently off the streets. That's why when you see housing, these campsites removed, they show up 30 days later, because we spend $3 million cleaning them up. And of course, those money goes to the contractors. The contractors give back the campaign contributions to the politicians. But one thing is never done is a problem never gets solved. That's what happens when the government gets involved in the situation. Another was the recent story about the LA County supervisors. During COVID, they wanted to restrict the right to increase rents. Now, this was beautiful. The government basically spent money it didn't have, causing inflation. And so then local governments like the LA County and state of California said, hey, we don't allow landlords to raise rents because that's bad. So we'll just take property from homeowners and give it to tenants, and we'll limit the rent increases where the law, it doesn't exist, where the law was never passed. And so they created emergency powers during COVID, and here you have the LA County supervisors extending the power they had during COVID. So it's not, they didn't even pretend to name a new emergency. You think they might say, oh, well, now we have the swine flu or the bird flu or the whatever, Mickey Mouse flu. No, they're just saying COVID. They're going to extend their emergency powers from COVID, even though COVID is what, a year, 2 years gone, 3 years gone? I don't even know at this point. But they're continuing to keep the emergency powers to basically take property from people, rightful homeowners. They're taking the right of a homeowner to get a return on investment and doing that obviously in exchange for votes. Another example of that is our mayor in Los Angeles, Karen Bass. So she also created emergency powers to solve the homeless problem. Now, this was even more different because she came into power a year ago or so. This was not during COVID, but she just declared it an emergency and as a result, gave herself emergency powers. And so we had a lawsuit called, from my organization called Fix the City, that challenged the mayor's rights to emergency powers for something like this. She wasn't elected to do that. The law doesn't give her those rights. She just took it. And of course, the California Supreme Court said, oh, no, that's fine. We're all for the government having whatever power it wants. And so we as taxpayers really have no input. We elect officials, we pass laws, and we have a mayor who says, I don't really care what the laws say. I want emergency powers, and I'm going to continue them. And we have a Supreme Court in California that basically says, yeah, that sounds reasonable to us. And we don't, as taxpayers, have the ability to change that. Another case of the government stepping in to solve a problem but really making it worse is one of the laws passed in California where you can take your lot, where it was a single-family home, basically, and split it and sell the back to somebody else. Now, originally, you had to actually build something on it. You had to actually create something of value that had to meet city guidelines. Now, that was way too difficult. The cities and counties were so incompetent that even stealing land and allowing you to sell it wasn't sufficient. So now what they do is they say, well, you don't have to build anything. You can just sell it to a developer and let them do it. And it sounds, really nice. Here's an article by Business Insider, which is basically the mouthpiece of our government. It's not a news organization. It's just purely a political rag at this point. And if you look at the map that they drew out, you see this lady, and they tell a story, Jeremy Collifer, and how nice it was. He is a grocery wholesaler, and he was struggling financially and sold the back half of his house for $100,000, and it's found money to him. He was struggling financially. And he gets $100,000. And that sounds great. But when you read in the fine print, we find out is a developer is going to take that land and build not one, but two more houses there, a double-story duplex. So imagine you're the next door neighbor and you have this nice backyard. Maybe you have a pool. Maybe your daughter likes to swim in the pool. Maybe your kids like to play in the back. Privately, who knows what you do in your backyard? It's your backyard. Or the neighbors behind you. And now you have this two-story unit. This is what we have. We have a second-story unit that overlooks our backyard. And in our case, while it's rarely used, it's for a traveling family member who doesn't come around town, it's creepy when they're there and the light's on and we're in our backyard and they're looking down on top of us. And again, in this case, the law did not allow second units or third units. The state of California overruled local law, in this case Sacramento, but the same's true in LA, and saying, we don't care what you want, taxpayers. We don't care what you want, voters in the city. We at Sacramento have decided it's best for the state to build as many homes as possible on land. And so while it does empower the owner of that lot to sell the lot, it disempowers neighbors who thought they're buying a house in a neighborhood of single-family homes, only now to find out they two-story duplex with renters in it is overlooking them. Instead of living next door to the owner of the property, they're going to be living next door to the owner and two renters. And that also means more traffic, more cars, more dogs, more Amazon deliveries, more fireworks, more everything is bad as well as good. More everything is bad of having more people in your neighborhood. Now, the government does it because they say they need the tax revenue because they misspend so much of the money they have. But at the end of the day, this is a taking of the rights of the neighbors to favor the homeowner. And the homeowner is not going to fight that because to them, they feel like they're getting free money. And there's nothing better for a politician than to try to bribe potential voters. Another effect of the taking by our city government is the recent changes by the state in response to the fires. You may remember a few months ago, we had fires in Los Angeles that caused the major Interstate 10, I-10, to be shut down for a few months and be detoured. That's because there was a homeless encampment with a bunch of junk, literally, and the junk caught on fire, and as a result of that fire, also fire caught into the neighboring buildings also underneath the freeway and caused damage to the rebar and the metal that holds the concrete together. Well, now the state is coming around to tenants who are in those buildings legitimately and say, you know what, because of the frequency now of all these homeless encampments, we need you to stop doing certain businesses that were there. I have a company that I'm a broker for that we rent property out to companies that manufacture furniture and use some of the items that are prohibited now. You can't have oil, gasoline, can't have pallets, can't have wood chips, can't have wood. They're making wood furniture, so they're not allowed to operate in there. Plastic piping and tubing, they were using that for other parts of their furniture as well. Paper products in more than consumer use. So one of the concerns is, well, offices are not consumer, right? An office might have, crates of paper versus, packages of paper. And so the attorney was very concerned about what that might look like. Batteries, whether companies want battery backup for various uses. Chemicals used in manufacturing products. So what's happened is that what was legal in these buildings no longer is legal because of the homeless encampments outside. The tenants in these cases, the businesses, and the owners, and I represented the owners for a while, were fighting like hell to get these homeless people off of our property. And because we're unsuccessful in a couple instances and fires created, now the lawful owners and lawful tenants are losing money. And has the city done anything really to stop the homelessness? No. Have they done anything to stop the LA sanctuary city encouraging illegal immigration where these people have to come here and need a place to stay? No. And so rather than solve the problem, what the city's doing is punishing landowners and businesses. And of course, as a result, it shouldn't surprise you to find out that the businesses they're forced to shut down lay off their employees. And it shouldn't surprise you to find out that when businesses lay off employees, they don't pay taxes and the employees don't pay taxes. And so we continue in Los Angeles in the spiral in an attempt to placate the homelessness. And we call them housing deprived, whatever the stupid word is for it now. But the reality is that this continued pandering to illegal immigration and its effect around the city is slowly destroying the city business structure. So is the city going to solve the problem? This is a great statistic I saw this week. The city of San Francisco, the second largest city in California, one of the most beautiful cities in America, homeless problem, housing affordability problem. So far this year, they approved 16 houses. A city of what? I don't know, 800,000 people? They approved 16. I'll bet more than 16 houses burned down in San Francisco this year. I bet more than 16 have become drug-infested dens of crime this year. But they've agreed to build 16 houses more this year. And so I think really what's happened is at some point, the city governments and the local governments, the state governments just need to give up and realize that the solution is they're taking less power, they're spending less money. And the only way that happens is if we as citizens, I think, force them in a situation. In the past, I've talked about the recall of the governor, and that's underway. I also have a friend, Dan Tran, who's running for state senate in Azusa. I really admire what he's doing, trying to get a person involved, a business person running for office, not as a career, but because he wants to give back to the state that's served him. And so we as citizens have to get involved and take the government back. The solution is not electing politicians who are going to take power and solve the problem. The solutions are going to be the government needs to stop taking power. We as citizens have to stop giving it to them, take the power back, and solve the problems on our own. What do you think? Put your comments down below. If you like this, like it, subscribe. Comments. I love comments. I get some every week. If I can help you in any way, please reach out. I'm at LAProbate on social media. Reply to this email, comment here. As always, Make today your best day ever.